With some of the exotic changes in Season 22, I think this has become the new best Arc Warlock build. This build is going to allow you to have infinite grenade, melee, and rift charges alongside being amplified permanently and having jolt effects everywhere on the battlefield. On top of that, this build is also going to greatly buff your super with one of our exotics we're running by letting it have a longer duration and just refilling its super energy in general. Arc Warlock has always been one of my favorite builds in the entirety of Destiny, and after countless buffs season after season, I think it is finally in a good spot, especially pairing it with this exotic. This is an extremely easy build to use and set up, and it's effective for almost anything in the game that you want to do. From battlegrounds, GMs, and even things like master raids, this build has you covered. Now speaking of raids, I want to thank today's sponsor of the video, Raid Shadow Legends. Now Raid has a ton of content to offer, things like 600 plus unique champions to choose from, crazy dungeon combat, intense PvP gameplay, and my personal favorite, build crafting. There are a ton of ways you can personalize your champion's build, and I mean, just look at all these different combinations you can do. You can then take those champion builds, form your ultimate team, and take on some of the hardest challenge the game has to offer. If that sounds interesting to you and you want some free sweet loot, be sure to log in between right now and October 23rd, 7 different times to claim a free legendary champion, Sun Wukong. And if a free legendary champion wasn't enough, be sure to use my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen right now. You will even receive a free starter pack to help you start dominating in the arena today. With all the amazing content in the game currently and even more coming out in the future, if you haven't jumped into Raid Shadow Legends yet, now is the perfect time to start. Alright, starting off, let's jump right into our exotics, since this is going to be a very vital part of this build. These are the Geomag Stabilizers, and they have the exotic perk Close Enough. Damaging targets with Chaos Reach extends its duration. Collecting Ionic Traces grant you energy for Chaos Reach. Chaos Reach is notorious for being one of the worst supers in the game, but with buffs that it has gotten over the seasons, it actually is a pretty solid super now. If you do pair it with Geomags with that extended duration, it can pump out a ton of damage. It still does have the negative effect of you can't actually use heavy ammo if you are using the super, but if you do run out of ammo, this is a great super to tack on some extra damage. It's also very strong for taking out single targets like champions, and even really good for ad clear if you need it for that. And the added benefit now is that every time you pick up Ionic Traces, it will grant you some energy for Chaos Reach. So now on top of doing damage, getting kills, picking up orbs, you will have another way of generating super energy, and it lets you spam these even more often with its buffed duration. Now, speaking of Ionic Traces, I do want to talk about how they work really quick. So whenever you pick up an Ionic Trace, it's going to grant you a chunk of your ability energy. Most people would take things like Fallen Sunstar to buff that ability energy regen a little bit more, but in all honesty, you don't really need it, as you will be making a ton of Ionic Traces in the first place. And I think taking something like Geomag to buff your super energy regeneration, since you're already getting infinite abilities anyway with these Ionic Traces, is definitely the way to go now. But speaking of abilities, let's jump into our subclass and further talk about how we're going to make these Ionic Traces and also round out the build. So starting off, we're going to take Electrostatic Mine. So defeating a target with arc abilities or defeating jolted or blinded targets creates an Ionic Trace. Collecting an Ionic Trace makes you amplified. So since you know you can spam your abilities all the time, this just means every time you get an ability kill now, you will make an Ionic Trace, and then if you defeat a jolted or blinded target, you can also make them. We're going to be jolting targets everywhere with this build, from things like our weapons and even our abilities. And this also does have the added benefit that if you pick up an Ionic Trace, you become amplified, which means you can move a little bit faster. Amplified is very nice to get you out of sticky situations, and it just makes the overall flow of playing Arc a lot more fun. Now our next aspect is going to be Arc Soul. So cast your Rift to create an Arc Soul that fires at targets in front of you. Allies can pass through your Rift to get an Arc Soul. Your Rift charges faster when allies are near. While Amplify, your Arc Souls are supercharged and gain increased fire rate. Arc Soul honestly does a ton of damage now, and if you have a team of 6 people running this, it can absolutely kill everything on their own. The other added benefit of this is the fact that your Rift will recharge faster when you're near teammates. Pairing that with Ionic Traces, that means you can just spam your Rift even more now, and being able to spam that is going to be a pretty vital part of some of our mods later in the build. On top of that, if your Arc Soul does get a kill, it will also make an Ionic Trace, so this is just another further way of making Ionic Traces. And what's cool, if you do become amplified, the Arc Soul gets increased fire rate, and then obviously picking up an Arc Soul will make you amplified, so these two aspects kind of synergize with each other very well. It's going to be constant ability regeneration and constant Arc Soul buffs. Now for your abilities, I would highly recommend taking Pulse Grenade. It's one of the best arc grenades in the game, but honestly this is up to you if you want to swap this out, but Pulse Grenade does really get the job done. I do like to take Chain Lightning just because it can jolt enemies, which means it can stun or overload champions. If you want to take Ball Lightning for more single target, you can. This did get some changes, but I really still prefer Chain Lightning because it can just jolt everything, chain lightning everywhere, and it's pretty good for ad clear. Then I highly recommend healing rifts, since you're going to spam rifts a lot. This just means it's going to be good for your survivability. You can put down a bunch of healing rifts everywhere for your teammates that can also grant arc souls for them, and you can pretty much keep the whole team alive while also giving them offensive capabilities. Now, obviously for super, we're taking Chaos Reach. Like I already said, this is extremely strong for ad clear, single target damage, and we're going to be able to spam these a lot. Now, jumping into our fragments, I'm going to be taking Spark of Resistance. So while surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage. This is going to be nice because whenever you're surrounded, now you just take less damage. This fragment paired with your Rift ability regeneration rate with things like Arc Soul is extremely strong. You can play very aggressive with this build because you're always going to have a healing rift and you're always going to be taking reduced damage, and it is almost a must slot in my opinion. Now, our next fragment is going to be Spark of Shock, so your arc grenades jolt targets. This one's pretty self-explanatory. Now you can just spam your grenades everywhere that will also jolt targets, and remember, getting an ability kill or a jolt kill will also make Ionic Traces, so this is just another way of making Ionic Traces, and again, it's also just extremely strong for ad clear. Now, our next fragment is going to be Spark of Ion. So defeating a jolted target creates an Ionic Trace. Now, this works just like Electrostatic Mine, but it does stack with it. So now whenever you defeat a jolted target, you can have both of these proc at the same time, which will generate you 2 Ionic Traces, and that just goes for even more ability regeneration and even more super generation. And then for our final fragment, I do like to take Spark of Discharge, so arc weapon final blows have a chance to create an Ionic Trace. You're always going to be running an arc weapon with this build, so this is again just another way that will create Ionic Traces simply by just getting kills and playing into what you're already using. And speaking of weapons, your only main thing you need to worry about is having an arc weapon that has the Volt Shot perk on it. You can also run things like Cold Heart, so when dealing sustained damage, you'll make an Ionic Trace, or even things like Delicate Tomb, so just when getting killed, you can also make an Ionic Trace. But overall, in my opinion, I think Volt Shot is going to be a better option because you can kind of run this on whatever weapon, and obviously being limited to an exotic like Cold Heart, Delicate Tomb can be a little iffy sometimes. So this is just what I prefer, but if you'd like to run those other ones, definitely be sure to do so. The Volt Shot reads, reloading this weapon after defeating a target overcharges this weapon for an improved short period of time, causing it to jolt on its next hit. Now, the reason mine says for an improved short period of time is because I do have it enhanced. Normally it would just say it overcharges it for a short period of time. But essentially now, every time you get a kill, you reload your gun, you can proc Volt Shot, and then shooting the next enemy will make them jolt it, which means you will proc Ionic Traces with your primary weapon. Again, Volt Shot can come on a plethora of weapons, so you can run whatever weapon you want to. I just prefer the Achilles SMG, but obviously you can swap these out for whatever champion mods are going on in the current season. But pairing this with all our other fragments, you're going to be able to generate a bunch of Ionic Traces, which again just means more super energy. But your other weapons, it's really up to you. Just make sure you take something that's really good for DPS, and I would highly recommend a single target damage weapon for your special weapon if you're not running something like Cold Heart. Since your subclass and your primary weapon already is extremely good for ad clear, this just means you have another way of taking down some higher health targets if you don't have a Chaos Reach active. Now, for stat distribution, I would highly recommend 100 Resilience to get 30% damage reduction, and 100 Discipline so you can spam your Pulse Grenade even more to jolt enemies. And then if you can get to 100 Recovery, that is by far going to be your best in slot, because being able to spam your rifts even more to make more Arc Souls is going to be very, very strong. And on top of that, it also does increase your recovery rate, so that is also just really good in general too. So definitely prioritize those three, but I would definitely go for 100 Resilience and 100 Discipline if you can only get to 100s. Now let's take a look at some artifact perks. First off, I'm going to be taking an Elemental Orbs Arc, just so whenever I get arc weapon kills, I can make these arc elemental orbs. These aren't the greatest. You can just throw them to jolt enemies, which is nice, which again will make Ionic Traces. You know, you kind of just make them every now and then, and you can just use them for some benefits. And some of those benefits are going to be things like refreshing pickup. So picking up a Tangle or Elemental Orb grants energy to your least powered ability. This will just further help with some of your ability regeneration. Again, using your abilities will also make Ionic Traces, so being able to get more abilities is always nice. Even things like communal pickup. So when an ally destroys or picks up a Tangle or Elemental Orb, the Tangle cooldown is reduced by 5 seconds, and you gain bonus damage with weapons matching your subclass for 10 seconds. This is nice, so if someone does pick up your Arc Elemental Orb, you just get a bonus to Arc weapon damage, which just means you can proc Volt Shot a little bit easier. Again, just a nice thing to slot in there. Next up is things like Elemental Fury. So while stunned, champions take bonus damage from your abilities and Elemental Orb damage. Since you're going to spam your abilities a lot, you can just stun champions, and now you just do a little bit more damage to them. And then finally, Monochromatic Maestro. So dealing elemental ability damage increases matching weapon damage, and elemental weapon damage increases matching ability damage. Bonus granted is 10% for 5 seconds. Since you can spam abilities all the time, you're going to be proccing Volt Shot all the time. This is a no-brainer. You're just pretty much going to have a 10% damage increase for both of them permanently, which is very, very nice. Now let's jump over into armor mods. So if you all like to see an in-depth breakdown of this, be sure to head over to Mobalytics. I will link everything down below, and you can read about everything over there while I go over it in the video. But all right, starting off with our helmet, we're going to be taking a harmonic sight. So rapid arc weapon final blows creating orbit power. This is going to be really good for getting your armor charge systems up. This is also just good for granting you some extra super energy since you're going to be making orbs all the time. Now, as stat sets, gain bonus super energy on grenade kills. So now when getting grenade kills, you will also gain extra super energy. But on top of that, since you are jolted enemies, you will make those Ionic Traces to further gain you even more super energy, which means you can spam Chaos Reach even more. Then Dynamo, so reduces super cooldown when you use your class ability near targets. So since you can spam Arc Souls everywhere, you can spam your healing rifts everywhere, this is just another way of constantly getting some super energy up. And now just every time you pick up Ionic Traces, you get some. Every time you take grenade kills, you get some. Then every single time you place a rift down, you'll get some. Now let's move on to our arms. I'm going to be taking a Harmonic Loader, so increase the reload speed of arc weapons. This is just nice to help increase that bolt shot uptime, being able to reload the gun a little bit faster after getting a kill. Obviously, you can proc bolt shot, get another kill, make those Ionic Traces. Now, firepower is our next one. So your grenade final blows create orbs of power. So now every time you get a grenade kill, you get super energy, you can Ionic Traces, and now you're even making orbs again for further super energy and that armor charge system. Now, next up, we have Bolstering Detonation. So it grants class ability energy when you cause damage with a grenade. This is nice because since you can spam your grenade a lot, this just means now you're going to get even more rift energy back to further increase super energy with things like Dynamo. Now, if your chest piece, always go with triple resistant mods. This is just going to be the base for pretty much every single build in the entire game. It makes you more tanky, and just swap these out for whatever you need to, depending on whatever activity you're going into. Now for our boots, I do like to run a recuperation, so it replenishes health each time you pick up an orb of power. This is nice since you're making orbs with your grenades and your weapon. You can now just run over an orb, get some health, and then pairing that with things like spark resistance and all your healing rifts become very, very tanky. Now I also like to take an innervation, so it reduces grenade cooldown each time you pick up an orb of power. Again, just like recuperation, whenever I pick up an orb, I get health. Now I will get grenade energy, which means I can spam even more grenades to further make those Ionic Traces and orbs. And then finally, I like to take an absolution, so it reduces all ability cooldowns each time you pick up an orb of power. This is nice because I'm going to get all my ability cooldown now, and if I was to take a double innervation, it wouldn't actually net me a higher bonus than taking innervation and absolution. So you are technically getting more grenade energy with these two equipped. But on top of that, you also are getting the benefit of also refilling your class ability and your melee. Now for our bond, I do like to take a bomber, so it reduces grenade cooldown when using your class ability. This is nice because pairing this with bolstering detonation, so when I deal damage with my grenade, I get class ability energy. Now when I use my class ability, I'm getting grenade energy. They synergize really well with each other, and then obviously both of those again can make you extra super energy. Pairing up all those Ionic Traces, you have a ton of super energy. Then I like to take a powerful attraction, so it automatically collects nearby orbs of power when you activate your class ability. Since you're spamming it a lot and you're playing into a bunch of orb-based mods, this just means now you can pick up all the orbs around you and proc all those mods without ever even having to run over them. And what's really cool is since you're mainly running Healing Rift, you put a Healing Rift down, you immediately start to heal, and you pick up all the mods to proc recuperation, and you pretty much just get to max health when placing one Rift down. And then finally, I like running Tilt Kickstart, so when your class ability energy is fully expended, you gain class ability energy. Additionally, your armor charge is consumed, and you gain additional class ability energy for each stack. So now whenever I use my Rift, I just get energy back, and depending on the amount of armor charge I have, I get even more back. And since this is our only armor charge mod that's taking advantage of it, you're always going to have the max benefit of this, and this just means you can further spam your Rifts even more now. But that is pretty much the build. As a recap, all you want to do again is spam all your abilities to constantly make Ionic Traces, get Volt Shot kills to constantly make Ionic Traces. If you are running Cold Hard Delicate Tomb, play into those to make those Ionic Traces. The whole point is to collect as many Ionic Traces as humanly possible to further increase your ability regeneration rate, on top of also generating you super energy. Once you get that super, you do have a buffed Chaos Reach that is really good for single target damage, ad clear, anything you want to use it for. And don't be scared to use these because you're going to be generating them a ton with this build. The neutral game of this build is extremely strong, and then once you get to that cap, it is also very, very good. And on top of that, you're pretty much unkillable with things like recuperation, spark resistance, and all the healing rifts you're going to have around the battlefield. This build is a ton of fun, and if you really like Arc Warlock, this is 100% one I would recommend you try out. And like I do at the end of all these videos, this is the transmog I'm running on my Warlock. I definitely try to go for a lightning look, and if you want to make your Warlock look like this, be sure to copy it down, and I hope you all can enjoy it. But alright, that's going to do it all for me. Let me know what you all think about the Arc Warlock in the comments below. Have you tried out the Geomag buff with this current season? I was honestly surprised with how much I enjoyed it and how effective it actually is. It is 100% the new exotic I will always be running if I'm playing into an Arc build, unless I'm taking Storm Trance, but let's be honest, no one's ever really taken Storm Trance. Regardless though, I really hope you all enjoyed. If you did and learned something new, consider subscribing and dropping a like. All the support goes a long way, and I truly appreciate it. I wish you all the best of luck in putting this build together if that's something you want to do, but thank you all so much for watching this one, and have a great day.